It was a typical Friday evening, or at least that's what I thought. The kind of night where you hang out with friends, grab some food, and share a few laughs. Nothing unusual. I left my friend's house around midnight, the streets bathed in the pale glow of streetlights. The air was crisp, colder than usual, and it clung to my skin as I began my walk home. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the icon bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Let's move on with the story. I live just 10 minutes away, a short stroll. I've made that walk hundreds of times before, so I wasn't nervous. But tonight, something felt different. It was the kind of cold that seemed to wrap around you, sinking into your bones. There was no wind, no rustle of leaves, just an eerie stillness. The city felt empty. I could hear the faint hum of traffic in the distance, but my street was deserted. I was alone, at least. I thought I was. It started with a feeling. You know that sense you get when someone's watching you? That sudden prickling on the back of your neck? That's what I felt. I tried to shrug it off, blaming the cold or maybe just my overactive imagination. But as I walked, the sensation grew stronger. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Soft at first. So quiet that I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I paused mid-step, and they stopped. I turned around, scanning the empty street behind me. There was nothing. No one. Just shadows. I stood there for a few seconds, my breath visible in the cool night air, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid. After all, it was late. Maybe I was just tired. I shook my head and kept walking. But with every step I took, there it was again. Those same soft, deliberate footsteps behind me, perfectly in sync with mine. Footsteps. Soft at first. So quiet that I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me. I paused mid-step, and they stopped. I turned around, scanning the empty street behind me. There was nothing, no one, just shadows. I stood there for a few seconds, my breath visible in the cool night air, trying to figure out if I was just being paranoid. After all, it was late. Maybe I was just tired. I shook my head and kept walking, but with every step I took, there it was again. Those same soft, deliberate footsteps behind me, perfectly in sync with mine. My heart began to race. I could feel it thudding in my chest, and suddenly, I was hyper-aware of my surroundings. The flickering streetlights, the distant echo of barking dogs, the oppressive silence that hung in the air. I sped up, and the footsteps behind me did too. I spun around again. Nothing. The street was still empty. I took out my phone, trying to distract myself, but my fingers were shaking. I texted my friend, telling her about the weird feeling I had, but there was no immediate reply. Just me and the quiet. I kept walking, trying to convince myself that I was alone. But I wasn't. As I passed under a particularly dim streetlight, I saw it. A shadow, a figure. Just at the edge of my vision, standing far back, barely visible in the gloom. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't moving, just standing there watching. I blinked, and in that moment, it was gone. Panic surged through me, and I started walking faster. My breath came in short, sharp bursts, and my ears strained for any sound. But all I could hear was the echo of my own footsteps. Faster now. Louder. I was almost home. Just a few more blocks. I kept telling myself that. I'd be safe once I was inside. I'd lock the doors, turn on all the lights, and forget this ever happened. But the footsteps behind me didn't slow. They kept pace with mine, getting closer, more distinct. I was no longer walking. I was practically running now, Finally, my house came into view, the porch light a tiny beacon of safety. I fumbled for my keys as I reached the door, my hands trembling uncontrollably. As I jammed the key into the lock, I could feel it. The presence. Right behind me. I didn't dare look back. I threw the door open, rushed inside, and slammed it shut with a loud bang, locking it instantly. For a brief moment, there was silence. The kind that makes you feel like you've escaped. But then, I heard it. Footsteps. Inside the house. My entire body froze. There was no way anyone could have gotten in. The door had been locked. I hadn't seen anyone, yet the footsteps were unmistakable. They were inside, moving slowly through the hallway, as if they knew I was listening. My phone buzzed in my hand, startling me. I glanced down to see a message from my friend. "Stop joking. You're freaking me out." "What shadow?" I didn't respond. My hand was shaking too much to type. I had to focus on the sound, the steady, slow footsteps coming closer. I grabbed the nearest object, a small lamp, and held it like a weapon, even though I knew it wouldn't help. The footsteps stopped just outside the living room door. "Who's there?" My voice came out barely a whisper, trembling as much as my body. There was no reply. Just silence. Heavy, oppressive silence. I couldn't hear breathing, couldn't sense any movement, but I knew something, was there, just on the other side of that door. I waited. I'm not sure how long. Seconds felt like minutes, and my heart was pounding so loudly I thought it might burst. My grip on the lamp tightened, my breath shaky. I pushed the door open a crack, my breath shaky, my pulse thundering in my ears. I pushed the door open a crack, just enough to see into the hallway. It was empty. I exhaled a shaky breath. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But just as that thought crossed my mind, something flickered at the edge of my vision. The hallway mirror. There was something behind me. I spun around, but the living room was empty. No. No? No. No? Not empty. The curtains were swaying slightly, even though all the windows were closed. And then I saw it. A shape, a dark figure standing just behind the fabric, watching. My body seized with terror. It was tall, unnaturally tall, and its limbs were twisted at odd angles, like they didn't belong. It stood there, unmoving, and though I couldn't make out a face, I knew it was staring right at me. I bolted. Out the front door, down the street, running faster than I ever had before. I didn't stop until I was several blocks away, panting, my chest burning. I looked back, expecting to see it chasing me, but the street was empty. But even now, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, following me from the shadows. The worst part? I don't think it ever stopped. Even days later, I could feel its presence, just outside my field of vision. I'd see fleeting shadows in mirrors, hear faint footsteps in empty rooms, and feel that awful, suffocating sense that I was never really alone. Because once it follows you home, it never really leaves. It started like any other night. I was tired, a little stressed from work, and looking forward to a quiet evening at home. My apartment wasn't much, just a small one-bedroom in an older building downtown. But it was cozy, and it was mine. I had my routine. Come home, make some dinner, watch a show, and crash. That night was different. I was lying on the couch, scrolling through my phone, mindlessly watching TV in the background. The room was dim, with just the glow of the screen and a small lamp in the corner. Everything felt normal. Everything felt normal. Until I started to get that feeling. You know the one, when you're suddenly hyper-aware of your surroundings. Like someone's watching you. It was subtle at first. I thought maybe it was just the long day getting to me, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then, I noticed the temperature drop. I didn't think much of it at the time. It was an old building, after all, and the heating system wasn't the best. But the air felt cold, unnaturally so. A chill crawled up my spine, and I instinctively pulled the blanket tighter around me. That's when I heard it. A soft creak. The kind of sound wood makes when someone steps on an old floorboard. I muted the TV, holding my breath, listening intently. At first, there was silence, just the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the faint buzz of electricity in the walls. But then it came again, louder this time. A distinct creak coming from the hallway outside my door. My heart began to race. I lived alone, and it was late, too late for anyone to be wandering the hallways. Slowly, I sat up, staring at the front door. The sound wasn't like footsteps exactly, but more like a dragging noise. Something was moving out there, slowly, deliberately. I tried to tell myself it was just a neighbor, but deep down, I knew something wasn't right. The sound was too slow, too rhythmic, almost as if someone, or something, was intentionally trying to be heard. I grabbed my phone, instinctively dialing a friend, but before I hit the call button, the noise stopped. Sudden, complete silence. I exhaled a shaky breath, forcing myself to calm down. It was probably nothing. The building creaked all the time, and I was just letting my imagination get the best of me. That's what I told myself anyway. A minute passed. Then two. I was about to turn the TV back on when I heard it again. This time, inside the apartment, a faint rustling sound. I froze, ears straining to pinpoint the source. It came from the kitchen, like something, or someone, was moving around in there. My throat tightened as I sat there, paralyzed with fear. The kitchen was only a few steps away, just out of my line of sight. I could feel my heart thudding in my chest, the adrenaline kicking in. I told myself to get up, to investigate, but my body refused to move. I was too scared. Suddenly, the rustling stopped. For a brief moment, I thought I'd imagined it, that maybe it was just the wind or the old pipes in the walls. But then, I heard something else, something that sent a jolt of terror straight through me. Breathing, not mine. It was soft, raspy, barely audible. But it was there, coming from the kitchen. I stood up slowly, clutching my phone in my hand like a lifeline. My legs felt like lead as I walked toward the kitchen, each step careful and deliberate. The breathing continued, steady and close. I could feel the cold air pressing in around me, the temperature in the apartment dropping even more. As I reached the edge of the kitchen doorway, I stopped. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. But I had to. Slowly, I leaned forward, peeking around the corner into the kitchen. My stomach dropped. The kitchen was empty, or so I thought. In the dim light, I could see the small kitchen table and chairs, the sink, the stove. Nothing seemed out of place. But that breathing, it hadn't stopped. It was louder now, closer. That's when I saw it. The shadow, just barely visible at the far end of the room by the pantry door. It was tall, much taller than any person, and it seemed to flicker in and out of the darkness, like it was made of smoke. I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its presence. heavy and oppressive, like it was sucking all the air out of the room. I took a step back, and the shadow moved. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and click the icon bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Let's move on with the story. It didn't walk or float. It shifted, like it was sliding through the air toward me. Panic surged through me, and I bolted back into the living room, slamming the kitchen door shut behind me. My hands were shaking uncontrollably as I fumbled with my phone, trying to call someone, anyone, but my fingers felt numb. And then I heard it, a soft knock. It came from the other side of the kitchen door, just a few feet away from where I stood. My blood ran cold. The knock was slow, deliberate. It wasn't demanding. It was almost playful, like whatever was on the other side knew I was terrified and was toying with me. Another knock, this one louder. I backed up, my back pressed against the front door, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst out of my chest. I didn't know what to do. Call the police? What would I even tell them? That a shadow was knocking on my door. Then, without warning, the knocking stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It stretched on for what felt like hours, though I knew it was only a few seconds. I strained my ears, listening for any sign of movement, but all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. And then, out of nowhere, came a voice. Faint, but clear. Don't look behind you. I froze. Faint, but clear. Don't look behind you. I froze. The voice was right behind me, as if someone was standing just inches away, whispering directly into my ear. My entire body seized with fear. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Don't look behind you, the voice whispered again. A little louder this time, more insistent. Every instinct in me screamed to turn around, to confront whatever was there, but I couldn't. Something deep inside told me that if I looked, if I turned around, it would be the last thing I ever did. I closed my eyes, squeezing them shut, trying to drown out the voice, but it wouldn't stop. Over and over, it whispered those same 4 words, each time growing more desperate, more menacing. Don't look behind you. Tears were streaming down my face at this point, my body trembling uncontrollably. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to get out. I had to run. But before I could move, the door in front of me rattled violently, as if someone was trying to break through from the other side. The doorframe shook, the walls trembling as the knocking returned. This time louder, more frantic, like whatever was out there was furious. I couldn't take it anymore. With a scream, I yanked the door open and bolted out of the apartment, not daring to look back. I ran down the hallway, out of the building, and into the street, gasping for air. The cold night air hit my face, but I didn't stop running. I didn't stop until I was blocks away, my legs aching, my chest burning. When I finally stopped, I looked back at the apartment building. It loomed in the distance, dark and silent. There was no sign of anything unusual, no shadow, no voice. But I knew that whatever had been in that apartment was still there, watching, waiting. And I've never been able to shake the feeling that it followed me. Even now, I can feel it, a presence, right behind me. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a like or a comment and subscribe. It means a lot to us. Thank you.
If you're a fan of chilling tales, you need to hear about Sarah's terrifying encounter one lonely night. It was a night like any other in the quiet suburban neighborhood where Sarah lived. The streets were empty, the houses dark, and the only sound was the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Sarah had always felt safe in her home, a cozy two-story house that she had moved into just a few months ago. But on this particular night, something felt different. There was an eerie stillness in the air, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't quite shake off. First, it was just subtle noises, creaking floorboards, a draft. Sarah tried to ignore it, chalking it up to the house settling or the wind outside. She turned up the volume on her TV and snuggled deeper into her blanket, trying to focus on the movie she was watching. But the noises persisted, growing louder and more insistent. It was as if the house itself was trying to tell her something. She got up to check the windows, making sure they were all closed. But the draft continued. The floorboards creaked under her feet and she felt a chill run down her spine. But soon, objects started moving. It began with small things. A picture frame on the mantelpiece tilted to one side. A book that she had left on the coffee table now lying on the floor. Sarah's heart began to race. She tried to rationalize it, telling herself that maybe she had knocked the book over without realizing it, or that the picture frame had been crooked all along. But deep down, she knew something was wrong. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a growing sense of dread that she couldn't ignore. Doors ajar, the TV remote misplaced. Sarah distinctly remembered placing the remote on the armrest of the couch, but now it was nowhere to be found. She searched the entire living room, growing more and more frantic with each passing minute. Finally, she found it on the kitchen counter, a place she was sure she hadn't been to all evening. Her mind raced with possibilities. Was someone in the house with her? She checked all the doors and windows again, making sure they were locked, but the feeling of being watched persisted, and she couldn't shake the sense of unease that had settled over her. Then, her phone buzzed. Motion detected in the kitchen, but nothing on camera. Sarah had installed security cameras around the house for peace of mind, but now they were only adding to her anxiety. She checked the footage, but there was nothing there. Just an empty kitchen, bathed in the dim glow of the nightlight. She replayed the clip over and over, trying to catch a glimpse of anything out of the ordinary, but there was nothing. It was as if the house itself was playing tricks on her, and she didn't know what to do. Sarah locked every door, turned on every light. She hoped that the bright lights would chase away whatever was lurking in the shadows, but the feeling of unease only grew stronger. She could hear her own heartbeat, loud and fast as she moved from room to room, making sure everything was secure. She even checked the basement, a place she rarely went to but found nothing out of the ordinary. But the sense of being watched persisted, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone. But the footsteps, loud and unmistakable, echoed from upstairs. Sarah froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She listened, straining to hear any other sounds, but the house was silent once again. She took a deep breath and slowly made her way up the stairs, her hand gripping the banister tightly. Each step felt like an eternity, and she could feel the sweat on her palms. When she reached the top, she found nothing. Just an empty hallway, the doors to the bedrooms all closed. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, and she knew she had to do something. Grabbing a knife, she called the police. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely dial the number, but she managed to get through. She explained the situation as best as she could, her voice trembling with fear. The dispatcher assured her that help was on the way, but it would take a few minutes for the officers to arrive. Sarah clutched the knife tightly, her eyes darting around the room, looking for any sign of movement. She felt like a cornered animal, trapped in her own home, and she didn't know how much longer she could hold out. Signal lost. She bolted for the door. The call had been cut off abruptly, and Sarah's heart sank. She knew she couldn't stay in the house any longer. She ran down the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the empty house, and headed for the front door. But as she reached for the handle, she felt a cold breeze on the back of her neck, and she knew she was not alone. She turned around, her eyes wide with fear, and saw a shadowy figure standing at the end of the hallway. It was tall and dark, its features obscured by the darkness, but she could feel its eyes on her, watching her every move. A shadow, tall and dark, blocked her path. Sarah's mind raced with fear and confusion. She didn't know what to do. Should she try to run past it or find another way out? The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching her. She could feel its presence, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to fill the entire house. She took a step back, her heart pounding in her chest, and tried to think of a plan. But her mind was blank, paralyzed by fear. She knew she had to get out of the house, but the shadowy figure seemed to be blocking every escape route. Sarah fled to her car, waited for the police, She didn't know how she managed to get past the figure, but somehow she found herself outside. The cool night air a welcome relief. She ran to her car, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the keys. She locked the doors and sat there, her heart racing, waiting for the police to arrive. She kept her eyes on the house, half expecting the shadowy figure to appear in the doorway, but there was nothing. The house was dark and silent, as if nothing had happened. But Sarah knew better. She could still feel the presence lurking in the shadows, waiting for her to return. They found no intruder. The police arrived a few minutes later, their flashing lights a welcome sight. They searched the house from top to bottom, but found no sign of an intruder. There were no footprints, no signs of forced entry, nothing to indicate that anyone had been there. Sarah tried to explain what she had seen, but the officers were skeptical. They assured her that the house was safe, that it was probably just her imagination playing tricks on her. But Sarah knew what she had seen, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still in the house, watching her. But the security footage showed a dark figure in her kitchen just after she left. The police reviewed the footage from the security cameras, and there it was, a shadowy figure, standing in the kitchen, just moments after Sarah had fled the house. The officers were baffled, unable to explain what they were seeing. They suggested that it might be a trick of the light or a glitch in the camera, but Sarah knew better. She could feel the presence even now as she watched the footage. It was real, and it was still out there waiting for her. To this day, Sarah doesn't know who or what was in her house that night. She moved out shortly after the incident, unable to stay in the house any longer. She tried to put the experience behind her, but the memories still haunt her. She can't shake the feeling that she is being watched, that the shadowy figure is still out there waiting for her. She has tried to move on with her life, but the fear lingers, a constant reminder of that terrifying night. She has told her story to a few close friends, but most people don't believe her. They think it was just her imagination, or a bad dream. But Sarah knows the truth, and she lives with the fear every day. The entity was never seen again, but it haunts her still. Sarah has tried to move on, but the experience has left a lasting mark on her. She is more cautious now, always checking her surroundings, always on edge. She has installed new security systems in her new home, but the fear remains. She can't shake the feeling that the shadowy figure is still out there, waiting for her. She has tried to find answers, to understand what happened that night, but there are none. The entity, whatever it was, has never been seen again, but it haunts her still, a constant reminder of the terror she experienced. And so, Sarah lives with the fear, always looking over her shoulder, always wondering if the shadowy figure will return.